So joining our series on this episode is Leigh Jasper, serial entrepreneur and CEO of Saniel Ventures. Leigh co-founded construction software and collaboration platform Aconex over the course of 18 years before selling the business to Oracle in a $1.6 billion transaction in 2017. Since that time, he's been an active investor and holds a number of board roles, including with SEEK, LaunchVic, Salta Properties, SecondQuarter Ventures and the Burnet Institute. Leigh, pleasure having you as a guest on our program. We'll get to your background shortly, but before we do, I'd be interested to hear about Saniel Ventures and what you're seeing across the business at the moment.
Hey, well, great to be with you, Rob. And Saniel Ventures is effectively our investment arm. So with the sale of Aconex, we've done what a lot of entrepreneurs have done over the years, is take some of those funds and reinvest them back into the industry, into technology. So our focus is really investing into Australian technology businesses, high growth businesses, particularly around B2B SaaS, so business to business software as a service, where tools are effectively automating what are often quite boring processes that people don't want to do. A bit like Aconex, we automated a lot of construction and streamlined that construction process. So looking for similar types of businesses that are automating those processes. And in industries that often have network effects too, again, taking the learnings from Aconex and applying that to other businesses.
Reflecting on current market conditions, where are you seeing opportunity to invest at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's on that automation theme. So what's happening increasingly is software and service tools are bringing companies together across the supply chain into common platforms, which is something that you couldn't do. Well, you couldn't do it pre-internet. You really couldn't even do it 5-10 years ago. You needed the speed of the internet and also the ability to adopt those tools. So really like those types of businesses, again with strong network effects. We're seeing a lot of companies taking what might have been social or consumer-based products and taking those across, or the learnings from those products across into the B2B space.
I want to walk you through a few recent investments you've made, including Estimate One, Circle In and Vendor Panel. Talk to me about each of those businesses, if you could, and what made them an attractive investment proposition for you.
Starting with Estimate One, which I know quite well, that was a business in the construction technology space. Knew it during our time at Aconex. Really great business for connecting, again, the supply chain, so connecting all of the subcontractors to the head contractors. Really strong market position and great network effects within that business. And that business has done really well in Australia, is now looking to expand internationally. So happy to be a part of that business and help them grow. Circle In is, again, business to business, but a different problem, this time around people and people that are increasingly working parents, people who are working, now working from home a lot, of course, but how people balance up their work and their home life. So providing tools to enable that, particularly for larger corporates, but that's also come down into the mid-market space. And again, great founders building a great business. And then the last one was that you mentioned was Vendor Panel. As I mentioned before, it's almost in a sense taking something which people don't like doing, which is procurement, and just streamlining that and making it super easy. Again, very strong network effects in that business, a great market position in Australia, and another Australian business looking to expand internationally.
Now, in an article this time last year, you warned that there was a risk of tech jobs fleeing overseas. Has that occurred to the extent that you thought it would have 12 months ago?
Well, I think quite a few things have changed. Firstly, we've had our borders closed, so if you wanted to employ anybody in tech, it's pretty damn hard to get them into the country. So that hasn't helped. I think the other thing is with the work from home, which is really work from anywhere, you don't need to be, if it's an Australian business, you don't need to hire people here. So seeing Australian business are often hiring teams offshore. We did that to some degree with Aconex, we just couldn't get the talent locally, so we built teams in offshore locations. Mind you, it's also an opportunity for Australia. We don't need to be right next to everything. Now that people can work from anywhere, Australians can also be working for international businesses based here in Australia. So we haven't seen really any inflow of people over the last 2 years. So we'll see how it goes over the next 6 months as borders reopen. But I'd hope that we can get great tech talent into Australia, because without that talent, I mean, sort of self-reinforcing, as you get more talent in, it builds more talent and creates, again, a bit of an ecosystem of tech expertise within the country.
I want to briefly explore your background. As I understand it, you grew up in Rutherglen and attended Scotch College, where fortuitously you went on to meet Rob Philpott, your business partner. Talk to me about Leigh Jasper as a student, if you could.
Well, it was a long time ago now, of course, but grew up in country Victoria, went off to boarding school. Always, I guess I liked school. I did okay at school, but particularly liked mathematics, and that led me on to going into an engineering degree. As I started to see what engineers did, and did quite a few summer jobs. I thought, well, I don't really want to be on a, in one example, I worked with Esso offshore fixing pumps, or at least advising on how to fix the pumps. Wasn't actually physically fixing them myself, but so I thought, well, that's sort of interesting, but could I have do something a bit broader? Ended up going into management consulting with McKinsey & Company. Rob, who was in the boarding house with me, and good to meet him. I guess in the first few years, he was a year above me at school, so we were, he used to beat me up a little bit. Let me put it that way. But then we saw an opportunity to really, after a couple of years at McKinsey, which was during that first wave of the first .com boom, so 98, 99, 2000, to take some of the to really apply the internet and what the internet could do in terms of streamlining and bringing businesses together to construction. And he was at Multiplex at the time, so that's how the genesis of Aconex came about. So how can we take the internet and business models that were starting at that point and apply that to the problems that people had in managing construction projects.
Following graduation, you enrolled in a Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Engineering degree at the University of Melbourne. What appealed to you about these fields of study?
I think given my enjoyment of maths and science at school, I thought I'd continue that into university. Didn't want to be a doctor or a lawyer or anything like that. And then also thought that an engineering degree would perhaps lend itself to going into business at some point in the future. But very quickly, as I mentioned before, I just decided I didn't really want to be an engineer once I started doing some engineering work, and went across into management consulting pretty quickly. So I guess that view that I could do, follow what I enjoyed doing, but also expand that across into the business field. It's one of the things, actually, during university, I spoke to a career counsellor about potentially adding, I wanted to do originally engineering and commerce. And the advice I said, well, you can do commerce anytime. If you like maths, keep doing that. And took her advice, and it ended up working out. But that's what I did at uni. I did a maths degree alongside my engineering degree. And
then talk us through the story of how Aconex came about in 2000, I think it was, and then the platform launched in 2001.
Yeah, so good mate Rob, we've been to school together, as we talked about earlier. We're still good friends through uni, and started to talk about how the internet could be used to streamline construction. At McKinsey & Company at the time, we were doing a whole lot of work for various different businesses around what the internet was doing to their industry. So this was the newspaper industry, the media, even some consumer companies, banks, all these companies were trying to work out, well, what does the internet mean for our business? And so we thought that there was an opportunity to use the internet to change the way construction happened, and to really eliminate all of that hard copy information that at the time was difficult to manage in the industry.
And then from there, how did the business take on the next steps? As I understand it, raised about $1.8 million, mostly from friends and family, and then came another $2 million of funding about 12 or 24 months after that. Take us through that journey.
I mean, to be honest, we were pretty lucky. I think in hindsight, I'd realise how lucky we were to be able to raise those funds. I mean, we were two guys with a business plan. We didn't have, back then there was no AWS, so you couldn't throw up a website. It was very hard. You couldn't really show anything and start to get a product to market. So we had literally just a business plan, black and white. I think it wasn't anything fancy, but laid out sort of our vision for what we could do in the industry. Thankfully, some people thought that it might work. We had people from construction, we had some people from McKinsey, just basically put the tin around, put the hat around, if you like, to try and raise that money, and then started the business. So we raised that. We're, again, probably lucky to raise that money, and then it got a bit harder. We built the product, took it out to market, but knew we needed to raise another round to take the business to the next level. Then September 11 happened, so everybody put their hands back in their pockets. We were, I think, only 17 or 18 people. We laid off 6 people, went back to 12. It was Rob and me plus a couple of developers, and an office manager, one or two other people. So very small team. We were able to then sort of eke out our funds, get an extra 3 to 6 months of runway, and then people started to look at investing again, and we were able to get raise a couple of million dollars at that point. And then from there on, we started to hit a pretty, well, it's still tough, but a pretty good growth phase. But we were selling an internet-based service when most people connected to the internet via a dial-up modem. And if you were lucky, you had ADSL, and we'd sell to a construction company, and then they'd say, Telstra takes 3 weeks to get an ADSL line on site, and then some of our customers didn't have any computers on site, so when you're trying to sell an internet-based system when they don't have computers, it's a little tough. So thankfully they put them on eventually, but yeah, so but then once it started to move, it really took off, and then really the growth phase for us, which was probably the most surprising was through the mid-2000s, we had these very large projects in places like the Middle East that were struggling to manage their information flows, and we had a ready-made solution they could roll out effectively immediately, with a few days or a week of implementation. They were up and running. So we did some pretty incredible projects like Dubai Metro, these multi-billion-dollar projects all around the world. So it's quite an exciting time, growing the business into Asia, into the Middle East, and following our clients around.
Reflecting on that journey now, what were the biggest challenges that you encountered in growing the business?
I mean, the obvious one of people. It's always hard to get people who can help at the right stage for your business is at. But I think so beyond the people, it was that change management within companies was the next biggest thing. So often people go, yeah, that makes sense. We can see how that would help us. But then they had to go through this change management process internally. So it wasn't just selling the software, how that would change their project. It was actually selling how we as a company could also support them in that change management process. And that was quite tough in certain markets. We often found it was easier to sell away from head office, so sell to a project somewhere remotely. So Bechtel, as an example, ended up being a great customer of ours. Very hard to sell to Bechtel in the US, which was home base for them. Much easier to sell to them, ironically, in the Middle East or South America, and just get away from head office, get to where a project was really struggling, and then we could go in and help them start to put the runs on the board in terms of how we were delivering for that company, and then we could expand through their project. So a classic kind of land and expand approach. Get a couple of projects going and then roll through more projects after that. But yeah, people change. I think funding wasn't, whenever you raise funds, these days it seems so much easier. Being on the other side of the table investing, it certainly seems a lot easier than it was when we were raising funds, but that would come up every year or two, or every couple of years, and that was obviously challenging at the time to bring the funds in that we needed into the business.
On top of the people theme, I understand that Aconex had a unique culture that was driven basically from the top down. Talk to me about how you went about implementing that culture throughout the business. It
was an extension of how we wanted to work together. So the early team, so Rob and myself, a few others, when we were about 15 or 20 people, I guess, we started to say, what are the values and how do we want to work together? And I guess it was all around certainly respect for people, but also giving people a chance to try things. We expected people to do things differently. We knew we'd all make mistakes. We were making mistakes. We were new to this. Our team was new to it, but we allowed people to make those mistakes. Obviously not continue to make the same mistake multiple times, but learning from those mistakes, moving on, and growing. And it was and a bit of a can-do attitude as well. I think the thing that was nice in those early years, and which I think we maintained pretty well through the rest of the journey, was a pretty low-key, relaxed culture, not much hierarchy in the business, a lot of people that love travelling, so we hire backpackers. If we're going to the Middle East, we want people who are very happy to go to Saudi Arabia or to go to Oman and implement a project. But the culture was really important, and once we had this culture, we then set about protecting it and nurturing it. So really talking a lot about our culture. We made it a point to, whenever we hired people, we spoke about our values, the sort of culture we had in the business, and tried to, as much as possible, align to that. It also meant sometimes when we did get it wrong, which happens, we were pretty quick to move on it. So if we saw that somebody didn't quite fit culturally, we didn't really let that go. We would move people on, and we'd basically align the people to the culture. And I think you have an enormous privilege as a founder to create the culture within your business. And so I think sometimes people don't quite see that they've got that, a lot of power, if you like, to create that culture. So we wanted to create a really great culture, but then protect that culture we'd already built.
The business, as I mentioned, was sold to Oracle in 2017. What was the decision-making process that you went through to sell the business to Oracle v listing on the stock exchange, or selling to private equity, or just continuing the business as it was growing?
So we'd already listed. So in a sense, that was partly the sale process. As a listed company, we had to act in the interest of shareholders. So, to be perfectly honest, I've said this publicly. Personally, I wasn't looking to sell the business. I was very happy doing what I was doing. The business was growing well, but we were a listed company, and Oracle, after, I guess, a couple of times we'd said no. Eventually they put a price to us that we couldn't say no to, and we felt we had an obligation to our shareholders to act in their interest. Not just felt, I guess you do as a public company, whether you like it or not, you have that obligation. But we also thought, we wanted to make sure that shareholders were comfortable with the decision we'd made. And Look, it was sort of a bittersweet process. In some respects, it was obviously great for shareholders and great for us as shareholders. We're, of course, shareholders as well. But personally, I enjoyed what I was doing, enjoyed running the business, and would have happily kept doing that. But it has now given me the opportunity to take what I've learned and bring that into other businesses. And also, a lot of our executive team has moved on to do other things. So where Aconex came to an end as a standalone company is now part of Oracle. On the back of that, those skills that were built up building Aconex have now been taken into other Australian companies, and hopefully they're generating similar or growth, and that expertise has been able to help those other companies grow as well.
So once you did sell the business in 2017, what came next? What were your sort of immediate term priorities?
Firstly, making sure it was integrated. So there was a period of handing over to Oracle and making sure that for our staff, for our product, that all was taken across into Oracle. So after doing that, my role disappeared, so there's always an understanding that I wouldn't be there forever, that it was a matter of bringing the business across. And then it was started, as I said before, started to take some of those skills I'd learnt and put them back into other businesses in the Australian technology sector.
Let's explore Saniel Ventures in greater detail. Walk us through the firm in terms of who's involved.
I mean, it's pretty small. It's really just myself and an investment team. Obviously, I work across business I've invested in, so that takes up a bit of my time. But then it's being able to do things like what we're doing with SecondQuarter Ventures. So that's been a really great extension of sort of my investing through Saniel. SecondQuarter is really hitting a niche in the market which hadn't been serviced before, which is providing liquidity or secondary liquidity to technology companies. So often along the way, and we found this with Aconex, you have staff or early investors who have equity in the business, but there's no liquidity until you're listed. There's really no liquidity. You can't sell that stock easily. And we found along the Aconex journey that was incredibly valuable to have. In our case, we had a couple of our shareholders who were able to provide a bit of liquidity to our staff. So if a staff member had a few tens of thousands of dollars worth of shares or more, whatever it was, and they wanted to be able to sell some of those shares, they provided that facility and bought them from those people directly. So we saw that was really valuable for us in building Aconex and putting value on the equity that people have in the business. And so we wanted to provide that more broadly into the market. So alongside my own investing, and we were investing in a lot of these businesses that had secondary liquidity needs over time, and so we thought, well, we'll set up a fund that does that as a dedicated fund within the market, which has had great response. It's been fantastic.
Across the various roles that you hold at the moment, you're no doubt speaking to a lot of company founders, startup companies and that sort of thing. What are the major issues that you're hearing and seeing about on the ground?
A big one at the moment, and we sort of touched on it earlier, is just hiring, getting the talent into Australia, particularly in tech. It was hard pre-pandemic, but with virtually no immigration. Australia just doesn't produce enough technology resources for the companies we have here today. So and they'll only increase. So that's a real challenge. I think there's always getting strategy right. So the strategy comes before your operational execution, and just getting that strategy right. Because if you get it wrong and you head down the wrong path, it's very hard to turn that around. A third issue that often comes up is not always that founders know they need help on it, but they certainly will see it over time, but just building that sales engine. So it's one thing to have a great product, but you've got to be able to get out and sell it. And whether that's online, whether it's through inside sales, whether it's through people out carrying a bag, knocking on doors, whatever it is, you've got to sell a product. There's very few products that just sell themselves. And so getting into that, accepting that you can have a great product, but you need a great sales and marketing engine to have a truly successful business.
My final question, what does the next chapter look like for Leigh Jasper?
For me, well, continue to invest in the sector. I love technology and the impact it's having on society. So there'll be continued investment into the sector. Obviously, supporting the companies I've invested in. So that's something I really enjoy, helping teams build businesses. At the end of the day, I'm a business builder. That's what I've enjoyed most of all over my career, is putting the pieces together to build a business. And some people like building cars or motorbikes or houses or whatever it is. For me, it's putting the pieces together to build a business. So whether that's directly doing it myself or helping others build businesses, that's what gets me excited and gets me up out of bed every morning, and sort of is something that I find quite just a lot of fun, and it's quite motivating to be able to get up and help companies, help founders build great companies.
Leigh Jasper, pleasure speaking with you, and look forward to seeing what the next 12 months and the next 10 years look like.
Great, thanks Rob, great to be here.